So our objectives: what are arrays, the array creation process, how to initialize arrays. We'll look at how arrays are used in methods to return, how to return arrays in a method, and how to use arrays as parameters in a method. And we'll also look at multidimensional array, which is like a 2D array. Then we'll look at array with objects and the advantages and disadvantages of arrays. So let us consider this example. We have an integer a, which is 10, and this is a variable. A variable is designed to store one value at any given period of time. So if I reassign a to 15, the new value of a is 15. But what if we want to store multiple values at the same time? Like, for example, students' roll numbers in class, their marks, or even bank account numbers for account holders of a bank. It is not effective to be creating new variables for each of these scenarios. For example, it's not very effective to say row number 1, row number 2, row number 3, or define integers, integer row number 1, integer row number 2. It's just not very effective. So to help us deal with situations like this, we use arrays in Java. Array is a data structure that helps to store multiple values of the same type and reference value using a single name. So with one name, I can define the size of my array and then store as many values as I want at a given period of time. So they are a fixed size collection. You need to state the size of your array beforehand. We'll see that later on. And they can either be primitive data types like your integer, double, string, or objects. Individual values are accessed through index or subscript or position, generally starting at 0 for the first element. So we use index to access individual values in an array. Some more points on arrays. Like I said earlier, we only have a fixed set of elements that are stored in an array. If you define your size, you cannot change your size. And you have to specify your size with an integer, not a long or a double or a short data type. So just an integer. If you want your size to be 10, just 10, not 10.0, 10.1, only an integer. So arrays are objects in Java, and we can find the length of an array using the length method, which is something provided by Java to find the size of the array. And you can declare your arrays like other variables, but the square brackets have to be used. The arrays can be static, local, or used as a method parameter. Your variables in the array are arranged and have indexes starting from 0. So the value you put in first will always be first. The value you put in second will always be second. It will not change. The first element is stored at the 0th index. The second element is stored at the first index. The third is stored at the second. So your index starts from 0. So if you have 5 numbers, the index will be 0, 1, 2, 3, 4. And you have your nth element is stored at your nth minus 1 index, which is just mathematical equation. And like I said last week, any superclass of a class that we create is the object class, is the Java object class. So the direct superclass of an array type is the object class. And each array type implements the Java interfaces, the clonable and the serializable by default. So Java has 2 interfaces called clonable and serializable, which our arrays implement by default. We've got 2 types of arrays. the one-dimensional and the multi-dimensional array. So we'll look at the one-dimensional now and see how to create an array, and then we'll look at the multi-dimensional later on. There are 3 steps you need to follow when declaring an array. The first one is declare the array. So you say the name of your array, your reference variable. You instantiate the array and allocate memory, and then you initialize the array. So these are just 3 simple steps to remember when creating an array. So the first step, declaring an array. There are 2 ways to declare an array. You state the data type, your array name, then square brackets. For example, int a square brackets, or data type square brackets array name, which is int square brackets b. So either of this one is correct. Just depends on what you prefer. To instantiate and allocate memory, you need to use the new keyword, just like you're creating a new object. And this is responsible for memory allocation of arrays. So once you use the new keyword, for example, we've declared our array. So this is the syntax. Array name equals new data type, square bracket size. And our example, a equals new integer 5. So I said I want the size of my array to be 5. I only want 5 values in my array. So using this new keyword, the Java allocates 5 memories, 5 spaces for us in our array. So like I said, the size you request is what will be allocated. In this example, 5 memory blocks were allocated to A when initialized. Let us create our array and see how it is in our IntelliJ. So I created a new class, a new application called Java Arrays. And I'm going to create a new class called Arrays. I'm going to define my array, which was integer a square brackets, integer square brackets b. So these are 2 ways to declare your array. So this is the first step. Declare your array. The second step is instantiate array. And allocate memory. So this will be a equals new int 5. So we've allocated 5 memory blocks for our array integer a. So I just want to give an illustration of what's happening in the memory. When I declare my array a, my reference variable a, and I instantiate it with a new keyword and allocate memory. Java allocates 5 memory blocks to my array. And I just put here that you can also combine your declaration and memory allocation in one statement. So you don't have to do them step by step. You can actually declare and instantiate your array in a single statement. We'll try that now and declare our array. My array is integer c equals new integer 7. So we declared and instantiated our memory in this statement. Initialize your arrays. We have 5 ways of initializing arrays. You use the assignment via your index, or you use it in one statement during creation. You use arrays.view, you use for loops, or you take your user inputs and then you initialize the array. So using assignment via your index. To use your index to initialize your array, this is the syntax. Array name square bracket index equals value. So we have an array called assign array, which is assign array. The index is 0, which is the first value, equals 7. And then I've got here, since the array size is 5, the maximum index is 4 because 0 is counted, like I said. If you have 5, your size is 5, you start counting from 0. So it's 0, 1, 2, 3, 4, and the size is exhausted. So our assign array index, the second value is 5, the third is 3, the fourth is 9, and the fifth is 1. So in the memory, Java assigns your index to the value that you said you want it to be. So this is index 0, index 1, index 2, index 3, and index 4. So the first index of A is 7, the second index is 5, the third index is 3, and the fourth index is 9, and the fifth index is 1. So this is the first way to initialize your array. We'll try that now in our IntelliJ. Initialize arrays. I'm going to change this to assign array. So our variable makes sense. So to initialize this array called assign array, we're going to put the name first, then square brackets the index. I want my first index to be 7. You can also, you don't have to do it sequentially, so you don't have to initialize 0 then initialize 1. You can initialize 1 then initialize 4. So where you put it is where it will stay, it's not moving. So if I say 4 equals 1, this is my fifth array, my last array that I just initialized. And then assign array 2 equals 3, my third array. Assign array 1 equals 5. Assign array 4 3 equals 9. And we're going to trace this out using a for loop to see how it will look like. So for this, we say for int I equals 0, int I is less than. Instead of us putting an integer, we'll say we want I to be less than the length of the array, so we'll be the size of the array. So we'll be using the length method, then I plus plus. I'll just print out system. Value of I is so I'm just asking my for loop to print out the value of I and the corresponding value in the array that we created. So I'm going to run this and see what it says. So my for loop printed the value of my first index as 7, the value of my second index as 5, and so on and so forth. So this is an easy way to print out your array list instead of printing index by index. So you can use your for loop to print out all your arrays. It's very useful for arrays. We'll go back to our slide now. The first way to initialize your array using the index. The second way is in one statement during creation. So just as you can declare and initialize your array, you can also declare, initialize, just as you can declare and instantiate your array in one statement, you can also declare, instantiate, and initialize your array in a single statement. So in our example here, we have an integer called one statement array, which has been instantiated with a new keyword and allocated memory, and we've already put in our values immediately. So you can note, if you notice we did not put the size, that's because we've already defined our values. So the compiler knows that the array is taking in 5 values, and that is the size. So because initialization is taking place in the same statement as memory allocation, compiler already knows that the size of the array is 5. We can also use a Java class called ARRAYS.fill. So Java has a class called ARRAYS, which has a lot of array methods that can be used when you're dealing with arrays. Contains a set of methods that assist when using arrays, and fill is a method in the array class that initializes all elements in the array with a single value. So this is very useful if you want all the elements in your array to have the same value, and you can just easily use the fill, which basically fills all the size. If your size is 100 and you want those 100 spaces to have the same value, you can easily use array.fill, and then it basically just fills your array for you. And it also, the fill has different parameters. So you can take an integer, you can take in a long, you can take in a double, you can take in short, depending on the value you want to put in your array. So I'm going to give examples using these 2 ways. So using the first method, using index. And the second method is in one during creation. So we've got one statement array. Let's not forget our square brackets equals new. So we are instantiating integer, and we are initializing the variables. So you can just say 1, 2, 2, 4, 6, 8, 10. So we've created, instantiated, and initialized our arrays. If I want to print it out, I can do it again. And then I'll just print out so we know. array creation. Just print out just for demarcation and to know which one is which. Let's see. So if I print out, you can see that it prints it out for me without me using my index to initialize the array. So the value is, sorry, I forgot to change this for loop. So it should be one statement array. And then you can see that my value is 2, 4, 6, 8, 10. The values that I initialize in one statement. And now I will use the fill arrays to create using arrays.fill. To use that one, we'll just say arrays.fill. Yeah, so java.util. So apparently I had to explicitly state what arrays I was using because there's a lot of arrays defined in different packages in Java. So java.util.arrays.fill, and then I'm going to first create a new array called fill array. So integer fill array equals new integer 5. So I want my array to be filled with the value of 4. If I print it out, I should see that all my values should have 4. Let me change this to the array. So if I run this, the value of my fill arrays should be 5. Should be 4. I have an error here. So you can see that all the value of my array is 4. We'll look at the last 2 ways of initializing your array. So the next one is using the for loop. For loop can be used to initialize your array. You use the integer that is declared in your for loop declaration, and then just do some mathematical calculations to initialize your variable. This is useful if you don't have a specific variable, but if you have a specific variable, it's better to initialize it yourself or take user inputs but this is just if you want to do some mathematical calculations to create values for your arrays. The next one is user input. So you can use scanner to get the input from the user. So you can tell the user to input like 5 numbers. When the user inputs the 5 numbers, you then use the for loop to accept inputs and initialize it into an array. So you first create your user array, assign the size, then you declare a scanner object and you print out what you want your user to see. So enter 7 cards and the for loop is created. We'll do an example of these last 2 ways of initializing arrays and see how it works. The comments here using for loops. And I'll create a new array called for loop array. Give it a size of 6. Oh, I need my square brackets. Now use a for loop to initialize my array. For integer equals 0, I is less than for loop integer I. Okay, I think I got cut out, but I'm back now. So I was creating a for loop, and I was declaring my parameters for my for loop. For loop array.name. So for every index in my, for each index in my for loop array, add 2. So if my for loop array has an index of 0, then my value will be 0 plus 2, which means my value will be 2. So I'll create another for loop to print out my array. For loop is very useful in arrays. So we're doing a lot of for loops today. So my values should be 2, 3. Actually, let's just run and see. I'm gonna run it now. For loop, my values are 2, 3, 4, 5, 6. Because when my index is 0, the value will be 2. When my index is 1, the value will be 3. When my index is 2, the value will be 4, and so on. So that's one way using the for loop. But like I said, if you want to do if you're into mathematical calculations and you want to use that to assign your values, that's useful. It's also useful if you have a calculation process in an application, so you don't need to explicitly state the value, but your calculation does it for you. You can use a for loop to initialize your array. The last one is using the user inputs. So do that now, using user inputs. So we'll first create a string user array equals new string. I want my string size to be 7. And then I want to get the input from the user. So I'm going to use the scanner object. I'm going to say input equals new scanner. System.in. And if I go up, my scanner was actually imported for me. If you are getting errors, just import your scanner manually and java.u2.scanner and it should work. So I'm going to print out something for my user to see. So I'm going to say enter 7 cars. And after my user enters 7 cars, I'm going to say create a for loop. I is less than user array dot length I plus plus for each index in my user array, assign the input to it and go to the next one till there's no next to go to. So for each user array, for each index in my user array, so for each car my user enters, assign that to my user array index. So if I enter a car like Benz, that will be assigned to my user array index 0. If I enter another car under, and so on. I'm going to print out the array values using our for loop again. So I'll just copy this, copy all of this, paste it. So I'm going to run this. Let me see what it's doing. If I look at my output window, it's asking me to enter 7 cars. So if I say Honda, BMW, Benz, other cars, Toyota, JLR, Range Rover, and test. Okay. Right. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6. Okay, I forgot to put the user array. And this is 0, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. I'm going to try that again and see what the problem is. So I'm entering 7 cars. Honda, BMW, Benz, Range Rover, JLR, Toyota. Oh, so it took my Range Rover as separate words. But as you can see, I entered 7 cars and the value of my 7 cars were printed. So I did user inputs. I myself entered the 7 cars and my program assigned these cars to my array. So these are the 5 ways in which you can initialize your array. So there's no specific, you can use whichever one suits you or whichever one you feel more convenient to, or whichever one is required. But there's a range of ways for you to initialize your array. So we can also use arrays in methods. As a method parameter, we can also return an array just like we do with the normal data types and the objects that we've seen in the previous lectures. So we can use our array to find the minimum number. We can find the minimum number of an array using a method. We can display all values in an array. And then we can return arrays from methods, so you can get the values and the return type is an integer array. So these are just method signatures, and we'll create that now. Okay, close this one, and then we'll create our methods. Create a method find minimum array. Public void find minimum array, taking an integer array. We have another one. Now we have a third method, which is the public. It has a return type of integer and get values. Doesn't take in any parameter. For the display, we'll use a for loop to display our array. So then to basically be for integer I equals 0, I is less than. We're using this parameter, which is an array, so this is what we'll use. Array display dot length I plus plus. Print it out. Just do a simple print out. Array display square brackets I. For get value, we need to return something. So we can also take in user inputs like we've done for the above, and then the first write. Please enter values. First of all, we need to create our array, which is integer temp array equals new integer 5 So please enter 5 values. And then scanner inputs. Just copy from you. And then we do the for loop to assign the values, and then we return the value. Array. Next is see return sim array. You can also display the arrays. You just see display arrays here. You see what we're dealing with. And for the find minimum, we've got a parameter of array value. We can assign the minimum an integer and first assign it to the first index of our array, which is 0. And then we'll create a for loop to loop over our array, compare the arrays together, and pick out the minimum out of it. So for integer I equals 1, I is less than array value dot length I plus plus if minimum is greater than array I, array value minimum minimum value. So what this for loop is doing is it first assigned the first value of the array to minimum, and then as it's looping over all the arrays, it's comparing it, and whichever one is the smallest, it would be assigned to it and printed out. So it compares everything and then prints out the minimum. So we're going to use these methods and see how it works in our main class. So our main class is just right here. I'm going to just put a demarcation. And our first array is, we'll first have to create, or we've got a lot of arrays up here, so I'm just going to use it. So we have an array, one statement array. So we're going to use this array to find, we're going to find the minimum number in this array, and I'm guessing the minimum number should be 2. So hopefully that's what our program prints out. Find minimum need to make them static because we don't want to create an object. for them. Find minimum array. We're going to use the one statement array. One. So we need to do all this again. Let's just skip that for now. So we run. You see that the minimum value is 2. If I use another array, which I'll create here, and I'll just say integer values equals new integer 33, 44, 12, 23, 10, and print this out. Print out values. My minimum should be 10. You see the minimum value is 10. So because we created this parameter here, this is like a reference parameter. So when I create a new array and I use that array as a parameter in my find minimum, the reference parameter that was declared in the method is mirrored to use this code. So as you see, this values is a parameter in find minimum array. And when I go to where my array was declared, it is also an array that is needed. So what the application does is it just follows the basic, it follows the rules because this is an array and it is an array and it is an integer array that is needed in that method. So they are not the same, they are given different sizes, but because they have the same type and because it's actually what is needed in find minimum, the steps are followed, if that makes sense. The other one is just to display arrays. So to display, we've done this before, which is just basically for loops. If I run it, it should display my arrays, my values for me, which is 3, 44, 12, 23, and 10. And the last one is get values. So it should return an array. So it's asking us to enter 5 values. It's just printing the values for us. So these are ways in which you can use arrays as a parameter or return an array in methods. I'm going to move on to the next thing on our slides, which is multidimensional arrays. Multidimensional arrays is just an array of arrays with each element of the array holding the reference of another array. So it's just basically double array or 2D array, whichever one you want to call it. And this is the syntax for it. So data type in with 2 square brackets, array name, or your brackets is with your array name, or your brackets is at the back of your array name, or one bracket is at the back of your data type and one bracket is at the back of your array name. And to instantiate, you basically put the size of your arrays. So if I want 3 and 3, that's 3 rows, 3 columns. If it's 4 and 3, 4 rows, 3 columns. So it kind of creates a block. And to initialize, you basically do it the normal way, just a bit longer. The first index of your first array and the first index of your second array is 1. First index and second is 2, and so on. So we're going to do an example of this now. And I'm going to copy and paste just because of time. So we're going to do this in our main method. Let's divide this in multi-dimensional array. Okay, not the best. So we're going to create it int multi-array equals new int and then we're going to assign our variables. So multi-array 0, 1 equals 2, 0, 0. This is quite complicated. And then you continue like that until you get to 3. Okay, very well. 0, 1, 2, 0, 1, 2, 0, 1, 2. Okay, find everything. For us to see what is in our, we'll just display the arrays. Can't do that because the multiply. So for us to do that, we have to do 2 for loops, a for loop in a for loop, for us to print it out. So we'll do integer I equals 0, I is less than 3, I plus plus. Then you do another for loop. Integer j equals 0, j less than 3, j plus plus. Then you print out your array. Multi-array I, j. value of I plus j okay, again, and then we're going to print it out and see what it says. To delay this one because we don't need to put in system. Going to use our input now. So we can see that all our values are 222 because that's what we assigned it to be. If we change it, it will be different. So this is just a way to print out your multi-dimensional array. Another way to initialize this without using all these long method is just to say integer to the array equals new integer, which we just stated. So multiply 2, 4, 5. And we can bring this to the array out and see it. If we bring it out, you can see that Java has already arranged it for us instead of us doing all the work ourselves. So this is just multi-dimensional array in action. Going to move into array of objects. And you can create an object array just like creating array of primitive data types or creating a simple object. So you can pretty much create arrays of anything. So we've got our student class here, and we have a lot of students. So our student class will be an array. The type of the array will be a student, and the size will be 7. So the student array contains 7 memory spaces, each of size of students, in which the address of 7 student objects can be stored. So only 7 students can be stored. If you have 100 students, you can store 100. But the objects have to be instantiated using constructor of the student class. So we'll create this class called students, which has roll number and name. And we'll create these methods. We have a constructor. It takes in an integer and a string, and we're going to create some getters and setters. And then we'll create an array of these objects. So my Java arrays. So we're going to create a new class called students. private integer number, private string name. Creating a constructor, public students just a reminder, this keyword specifies that this is the variable we're referring to. We're creating two getters and setters. So we've created our student class and we're going to instantiate it here. Array class. So yeah, we have an object called student and we have an object array called student, which takes in 7 students. So if we want to assign our integer to the student, so students 0. Students 0 equals to students. Name the student 1. So student 1. And then Zero 1, 0 2, 0 3, 0 4, 0 5, 0 6, 0 7, and these. We'll put them firstly. Josh, Job, Mary, Becky, Campbell. So we've got 7 students with different roll numbers. And to instantiate the array, we're going to use the first method. Assignment 7. And 6. Okay. We got 6. So student 7, student 6, student 5, student 4, 3, student 2. And if we want to print out this array, we can create our toString here, which would help with the printing out of array. And then we use our for loop. Students dot length. And then if we run this, we should get you can see our students of index 1 is Jane, and so on and so forth. So this is a way in which you can use students array in Java. You can check other websites for different ways to initialize, because this can be quite complex. If you've got like 100 students, you obviously would not want to say student 0, student 1 up to 100. So we're going to look at the advantages and disadvantages of arrays, which is our last slide for the lesson of today. One advantage of array is it effectively allows us to store and use large values of the same type. So this is better than creating variables one by one. So you can create large number of values, massive amounts, 500, 200, just depends on the size of your application, and you can store the values as required. One of the disadvantages is that size has to be known in advance. So if it's compulsory for size to be known, and once you declare the size, it cannot be changed, and it cannot grow dynamically, which is a bad thing if you don't know the size of what you're doing. For example, if you have bank account holders and you don't have a fixed size of how much they would be, arrays might not be for you. So another thing, maybe array needs to be useful. Memory space is wasted if more memory is allocated and required. So if you think you need 100, but in reality you just need 50, the other 50 is wasted that could have gone to other things in your application. So this is one of the disadvantages of arrays. Generally, arrays are very useful and very good to use in Java applications, but you just have to take into consideration what you're doing before you use arrays in your application. This is everything the time. We've got one more lecture, but I think I'll just move that to next week, which is a short one is just exceptions, and that is the last topic for this class. So I think we'll just have to move that to next week. Apologies for that. But this is the end of today's lecture.